I never thought I'd be the guy living in a neighborhood where a laminated badge could ruin your day, but here we are. My name's Mike Thompson, and my wife, Emily, and I moved to Pinewood Estates, a cookie-cutter suburban community just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, hoping for some peace and quiet. Emily's a Delta Force operative, yes, you heard that right, and I'm a cybersecurity analyst who'd rather debug code than deal with nosy neighbors. We thought this place, with its glossy brochures promising community harmony and secure living, would be the perfect spot to unwind. Boy, were we wrong. My wife, a Delta Force operative, had just disarmed an HOA wannabe cop in our front yard, using nothing but her bare hands and a glare that could stop a tank, while I stood there, coffee in hand, wondering how our quiet suburban life turned into a battlefield. If that sounds wild, stick around, because this story only gets crazier. And if you're already hooked, drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare like this? We'd been in Pinewood Estates for exactly 6 days when it all started. Emily had just come back from a classified mission in some corner of the world I'll never know about. She was still in decompress mode, organizing our garage with military precision, setting up motion sensors around the house just in case. Me? I was in my basement office, sipping my third cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, trying to fix a client's firewall while ignoring the HOA welcome packet sitting on my desk. It was a 47-page booklet of rules, complete with a cover photo of smiling families and a tagline, Pinewood Estates, where rules build community. I flipped it open and laughed out loud at some of the gems inside. Grass must not exceed 2.5 inches, no visible laundry drying outdoors, and my personal favorite, residents must not engage in activities deemed disruptive to the aesthetic harmony. What even is aesthetic harmony? I tossed the booklet aside, figuring we'd keep to ourselves and avoid trouble. That same afternoon, Karen Brewster knocked on our door. Karen, the HOA president, was a 5-foot bundle of khaki-wearing, clipboard-carrying energy. She had a smile that screamed, "I've never been told no," and a Bluetooth headset that looked like it belonged on a NASA engineer. "Welcome to Pinewood Estates," she chirped, handing us a laminated badge with her face on it. "I'm available 24/7 for community needs. We take our rules seriously here. It's what keeps us safe and beautiful." Emily, who just returned from a mission where she'd probably diffused international crises with a paperclip, nodded politely and thanked her. I could see the tiniest smirk on her face, the one she gets when she's sizing someone up. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy explaining how we needed to register our mailbox color with the HOA board by next Tuesday or face a $50 fine. The first sign of trouble came the next morning. Emily decided to go for a jog, her way of clearing her head after months of high-stakes operations. She pulled on her gray hoodie, tied her sneakers, and headed out for a quick loop around the neighborhood. I waved her off, settled at my desk with my coffee, and got to work. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from our front yard camera. I figured it was a delivery from Amazon, maybe the new router I'd ordered, but when I checked the feed, my heart dropped. There was Emily, standing on the sidewalk, hands slightly raised, her face calm but focused. In front of her was a guy in a black tactical vest, holding a fake-looking pistol at her chest, shouting something I couldn't make out. Behind him, 2 more guys in matching vests stood like they were auditioning for a low-budget action movie. And parked nearby were 2 matte black golf carts with HSD painted on the side in white block letters. Home Safety Division, the HOA's self-appointed security squad. I dropped my mug, the coffee splattering across my desk, and sprinted outside, my slippers slapping against the pavement. By the time I got there, things had escalated. The guy with the gun, let's call him Officer Clipboard, was yelling about how Emily was suspicious for jogging without an HOA-issued ID badge. "This is a restricted zone," he barked, his voice cracking with self-importance. "You're a threat to community safety." Emily, who I'm pretty sure has stared down actual threats in war zones, kept her voice low and steady. "Sir, I'm going to ask you to lower that weapon for your own safety," she said, her tone so calm it was almost eerie. Officer Clipboard scoffed, holding the gun sideways like he'd learned it from a bad 90s movie. "We're the HOA police," he shouted. "That's higher than city cops around here." That's when I saw it, the tiniest twitch in Emily's right hand. I knew that twitch. I'd seen it once before, years ago, when she disarmed a drunk guy at a bar who'd gotten too handsy. My stomach churned. I wanted to yell, to tell this idiot to back off, but before I could open my mouth, Emily moved. In one fluid motion, faster than I could blink, she stepped forward, twisted the gun out of his hand, and had him on the ground, his arm pinned in a hold so precise it looked like it belonged in a training manual. She didn't even break a sweat. The other two HSD guys froze, their mouths hanging open, as Officer Clipboard wheezed into the grass. Emily leaned down and said something to him. I couldn't hear it, but his eyes went wide, like he'd just realized he'd picked a fight with a grizzly bear. I stood there, my heart pounding, half expecting her to pull out a zip tie and hogtie the guy, but instead, she stood up, handed me the fake gun. It was a cheap airsoft pistol, by the way, and said, Mike, call the real cops. As I dialed 911, I couldn't help but laugh. We'd moved here for peace, and now my wife was taking down HOA goons in our front yard. The real police showed up in under 5 minutes, 2 cruisers rolling in with lights flashing. The HSD guys started stammering about assault and HOA authority, but one of the officers took one look at Emily, asked for her ID, and nodded. Ma'am, you're good to go, he said, and just like that, they left. No questions, no warnings. I later found out Emily had shown him her military ID. Apparently, it has a way of shutting down arguments fast. As the golf carts drove off, I saw Karen Brewster standing across the street, her arms crossed, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. I knew right then this wasn't over. Emily, on the other hand, just dusted off her hands, gave me a small smile, and said, I think I'll finish my jog tomorrow. I couldn't help but laugh, but deep down, I felt a knot in my stomach. Karen had no idea who she was messing with, and I had a feeling things were about to get a whole lot messier. Karen Brewster didn't waste a single second. By the next morning, our mailbox was stuffed with a certified letter, 3 pages of HOA jargon, accusing Emily of disrupting communal peace and engaging in aggressive behavior. The fine? A whopping $1,200, due in 72 hours, or we'd face further enforcement actions. I read the letter out loud over breakfast, my voice dripping with disbelief, while Emily sipped her green tea, her face unreadable. Aggressive behavior? I scoffed, tossing the paper on the table. She disarmed a guy pointing a gun at her. What was she supposed to do? Offer him a muffin? Emily just shrugged, her lips curling into that tiny smirk I knew so well. She's doubling down, she said, her voice calm but with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. Let's see how far she's willing to take this. I should have known Karen wasn't the type to back off. That same afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting at the Pinewood Estates Community Center, a beige building with fake columns that looked like it was trying too hard to be fancy. The email invite, subject line, urgent, addressing a threat to our community, went out to every resident, and by 6 p.m., the sidewalk outside was packed with lawn chairs, coolers, and neighbors whispering like they were at a high school football game. I didn't want to go. I mean, I'm the guy who'd rather binge a Netflix series than deal with drama, but after seeing Emily take down Officer Clipboard like he was a training dummy, I couldn't resist. I threw on my favorite hoodie, the one that says, my wife's other ride is a Blackhawk, grabbed a notebook to look intimidating, and headed out. Emily stayed home, sipping tea on our porch, watching the whole thing on a live stream some teenager had set up with a GoPro. Have fun, she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. Don't get banned from the snack table. Inside the community center, the air was thick with tension and the smell of cheap coffee. Karen stood at the podium, wearing a khaki vest covered in HOA pins, her Bluetooth headset blinking like a warning light. Behind her was a whiteboard with the words Emergency Response Strategy scrawled in red marker, complete with stick figures labeled Threat Actor and Heroic Defender. The Heroic Defender had sunglasses and biceps that Officer Clipboard could only dream of. Karen adjusted her microphone 3 times, sighed dramatically, and began. Neighbors, she said, her voice trembling with fake emotion, it is with a heavy heart that I report a violent incident against one of our peacekeepers. Peacekeepers. Not volunteers, not security guards, peacekeepers. I almost laughed out loud. She pointed to a chair on the stage where Officer Clipboard sat, his arm in a sling, looking like he'd just eaten a bad taco. Captain Daniels, she said solemnly, was injured in the line of duty, protecting our streets from a trespasser with a history of aggression. My hand shot up before I could stop myself. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she forced a smile. Yes, Mr. Thompson, she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Quick question, I said, standing up so everyone could see me. What's this history of aggression? Because I live with Emily, and the most aggressive thing she's done is yell at me for leaving dishes in the sink. Unless you're counting her gardening. She's pretty intense about her tomatoes. A few neighbors chuckled, and I saw Karen's smile falter. Mr. Thompson, We ask that you refrain from sarcastic commentary, she snapped. Got it, I said, sitting down. Just real commentary from now on. Like the part where your guy pulled a gun on my wife for jogging. The room went quiet, and Karen's face turned a shade of red I didn't know existed. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice from the back shouted, "Let's see the footage." See, what Karen didn't know was that one of her HSD goons had a body camera, probably bought on Amazon for $29.99, because he wanted to feel like a real cop. What he didn't realize was that it auto-synced to the cloud, and some tech-savvy kid in the neighborhood, bless his heart, had hacked into the feed and shared the whole altercation on a Google Drive link. By the time the meeting started, 5 different people had brought laptops, and one of them, a retired teacher named Mrs. Carter, hit play. The footage rolled, and the room fell silent. There was Emily, jogging calmly, earbuds in, minding her own business. The HSD golf cart screeched to a halt in front of her. Officer Clipboard jumped out, shouting about trespassing. Emily paused, pulled out an earbud, looking confused. More shouting. Then the gun came out. Gasps echoed through the room. And then, in less than 3 seconds, Emily had him on the ground, the gun in her hand, her face as calm as if she were folding laundry. She didn't even raise her voice. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Karen's narrative had just crumbled like a stale cookie. Someone in the back muttered, "She should be running the HOA." Karen slammed her clipboard on the podium. "Enough," she shouted. "That footage is unauthorized. It doesn't represent the full context." "What context?" A woman named Sarah, who lived 2 houses down from us, called out. "That your guys are playing cop and pointing guns at people? What context makes that okay?" The room erupted in murmurs, and for the first time, I saw real doubt on people's faces. Karen tried to regain control, calling for order, but it was too late. The curtain had been pulled back, and Pinewood Estates was starting to wake up. As I walked home that night, the street lamps casting long shadows on the sidewalk, I felt a shift in the air. Karen's power, built on fear and nonsense rules, had taken a hit. Neighbors were whispering to each other, some even waving at me without looking over their shoulders first. Back at home, Emily was still on the porch, her tea cold now. "How was it?" she asked, not looking up from her tablet. "Better than cable," I said, plopping down next to her. "You're famous now." She smiled faintly. "I saw. Someone made a gif of me disarming him. It's got 3,000 shares on the neighborhood Facebook group." We sat in silence for a moment, the crickets chirping louder than the HOA had ever allowed. Then I said what we were both thinking. "She's not going to back down, is she?" Emily shook her head, her eyes glinting with that quiet intensity I'd seen before. "Nope. She's going to escalate." And escalate she did. The next morning, I woke up to find an HSD golf cart parked across the street, 2 guys in tactical vests pretending to take notes while staring at our house. By noon, another letter arrived, this one claiming Emily had violated a new rule, running with disruptive intent. The fine was now $1,500. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee, but Emily just set the letter down and reached for her laptop. "They're writing checks they can't cash," she said, her voice low and steady. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used before she'd taken down entire operations in the field. Karen had no idea what she'd just started, but I had a feeling Pinewood Estates was about to become her Waterloo. Karen's escalation was like watching a toddler throw a tantrum with a megaphone. She just kept getting louder, messier, and more unhinged. By the end of that week, our mailbox was overflowing with violation notices. One claimed Emily's jogging sneakers were non-regulation colors. They were navy blue. Another fined us $200 for excessive porch furniture because we had 2 chairs instead of 1. My favorite, though, was the $300 penalty for intimidating presence during recreational activity. I read that one out loud to Emily while she was pruning her rose bushes in the backyard. "Intimidating presence," I said, laughing so hard I nearly dropped the letter. "You mean the way you smile at the mailman?" Emily didn't laugh. She just clipped a thorn with a precision that made me glad I wasn't a rose. "She's desperate," she said, her voice low and focused. "Desperate people make mistakes, and I'm going to find them." I knew that look in her eyes. It was the same one she had when she'd come home from a mission and spent hours analyzing intel, piecing together patterns no one else could see. While I was busy ranting about Karen's nonsense, Emily was already 3 steps ahead, her mind working like a chess grandmaster. That night, she set up shop at our dining table, her laptop open, a stack of HOA documents beside her. "What are you doing?" I asked, peering over her shoulder. "Digging," she said simply, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "HOAs have to file financial records with the county. If Karen's as sloppy as I think she is, there'll be something we can use." I grabbed a beer from the fridge and settled in to watch. I'm a cybersecurity guy. I know my way around a database. But Emily? She's a whole different level. She can find a needle in a haystack while blindfolded and probably hum a tune while doing it. By midnight, she'd struck gold. "Mike, look at this," she said, turning her laptop toward me. On the screen was a public record showing that Pinewood Estates HOA had paid $215,000 over the past 2 years to a company called Green Vista Landscaping LLC for community beautification projects. According to the invoices, they'd installed 6 fountains, repaved 4 roads, and planted 25 flower beds around the neighborhood. "Sounds nice," I said, taking a sip of my beer. Except none of that happened. Emily clicked to another tab, pulling up time-stamped footage from our own security cameras. "Look at the dates they claimed the work was done," she said. "Now look at our street on those days." The footage showed nothing. No workers, no equipment, no flowers. Just the same old cracked pavement and the same empty lot by the clubhouse where kids played kickball. "This is a shell company," Emily said, her voice steady but with a spark of excitement. "And I'd bet my boots it's tied to someone on the HOA board." She was right. By 2 a.m., we'd traced Green Vista Landscaping LLC to a name, Brian Daniels. Recognize that last name? Yup, Officer Clipboard himself, or as Karen called him, Captain Daniels. Turns out, Brian was Karen's cousin, and Green Vista was just a P.O. box and a fake website. The HOA had been funneling money to him for years, and not a single fountain or flower bed had ever been built. I sat back, my mind racing. "This is fraud," I said, almost whispering. "Big time." Emily nodded, her eyes glinting with that quiet intensity I'd come to love. "And it's just the beginning," she said. "If they're this sloppy with landscaping, imagine what else they're hiding." While Emily was digging into HOA records at home, Karen was busy rallying her troops at the clubhouse. I got a text from our neighbor, Jessica, who lived across the street. She'd been walking her dog, a fluffy golden retriever named Max, when she saw Karen pacing outside the clubhouse, barking orders into her Bluetooth headset. She looked like she was directing a military operation, Jessica texted, adding a laughing emoji. She had a whiteboard on wheels, and I swear I heard her say something about neutralizing the threat. I showed the text to Emily, who raised an eyebrow. "She's really leaning into the dictator vibe," she said, almost amused. "Let's give her something to worry about." The next morning, Emily printed out a single-page flyer. Clean, professional, no drama. It listed the facts. $215,000 paid to Green Vista Landscaping, 0 projects completed, and Brian Daniels' name tied to the shell company. At the bottom, in bold, it said, "Where are your HOA dues going?" We spent the morning walking door to door, slipping the flyers under doormats and clipping them to mailboxes with a little note. "From your neighbors, Mike and Emily." We didn't confront anyone, didn't make a scene, just let the truth do the talking. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. I saw people standing on their lawns, holding the flyers, whispering to each other. One guy, Tom, a retired postal worker who lived 3 houses down, waved me over. "Is this for real?" he asked, holding up the flyer. "Because I've been paying $600 a year in dues, and the only beautification I've seen is Karen's new golf cart." I nodded. "It's real. And there's more where that came from." While we were stirring the pot in Pinewood Estates, Karen was holding an emergency HSD meeting at the clubhouse. Jessica texted me again, this time with a blurry photo of Karen standing in front of her golf cart squad, pointing at a map of the neighborhood like she was planning a siege. "She's talking about increased patrols and resident compliance checks," Jessica wrote. "I think she's losing it." I showed the photo to Emily, who was now cross-referencing HOA meeting minutes with county tax filings. "She's trying to scare people into submission," Emily said, not looking up from her laptop. "Classic intimidation tactic. It won't work, not when people start asking questions." And ask questions they did. That afternoon, A group of neighbors led by Mrs. Carter, the retired teacher who'd played the body cam footage at the meeting, started a petition to demand a public audit of the HOA's finances. They needed 50 signatures to take it to the Charlotte City Council, and by dinner time, they had 72. I watched from our porch as Mrs. Carter and Tom went door to door, their clipboards in hand, their faces lit up with a mix of determination and excitement. It was like watching a revolution unfold, one signature at a time. I turned to Emily, who was sipping her tea, her eyes scanning the street with that quiet focus I'd seen in her during the worst of the HOA drama. "You started this," I said, half in awe. She smiled faintly. "I just gave them the spark. They're the ones lighting the fire." By the end of the day, Karen's golf carts were circling the neighborhood like sharks, but the mood had shifted. People weren't scared anymore. They were angry. And Karen, with her clipboard and her fake cops, had no idea how deep a hole she'd just dug for herself. I went to bed that night feeling a strange mix of pride and nerves. Emily, on the other hand, was already planning her next move. "Tomorrow," she said, closing her laptop with a soft click, "we take this to the city council. Karen's about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong people." The morning of the city council hearing felt like the calm before a storm. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Emily typing furiously at the dining table, her laptop surrounded by a fortress of papers and highlighters. She was in full mission mode, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her face set with that quiet determination I'd seen before she'd left for deployments. "You ready for this?" I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee from our Keurig. She didn't look up, just nodded. "Karen's about to find out what happens when you play with fire," she said, her voice steady, but with a spark of anticipation that made my heart race. I couldn't help but grin. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was war, and my wife was bringing her A-game. We arrived at the Charlotte City Council building at 8:30 a.m., a good half hour before the hearing was set to start. The room was already buzzing with Pinewood Estates residents, some clutching copies of our flyer, others whispering excitedly to each other. Mrs. Carter and Tom were there, their petition in hand, their faces lit up with a mix of nerves and hope. I spotted Jessica in the crowd, her golden retriever Max sitting obediently at her feet. She'd brought him for moral support, she said. I wore my usual hoodie and jeans, but Emily was all business, black t-shirt, cargo pants, and boots that looked like they'd seen more action than most people's entire lives. She carried a single manila folder, her secret weapon, and I could tell by the way she scanned the room that she was already calculating every possible outcome. Karen showed up at 9:02 a.m., 2 minutes late, which in HOA terms might as well have been a felony. She marched in like she owned the place, a binder the size of a dictionary tucked under her arm, her khaki vest jingling with pins. Behind her trailed officer clipboard, Brian Daniels, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, his arm still in that dramatic sling. Karen had even roped in another HSD guy to stand behind her like a budget Secret Service agent, complete with a fake earpiece that I'm pretty sure was just a Bluetooth headset from Walmart. She set her binder on the table with a thud, adjusted her headset, and shot me a glare that could have curdled milk. I just waved, which made her face turn an even deeper shade of red. The hearing started with the council president, a no-nonsense woman named Linda Harper, calling the room to order. Mrs. Carter went first, presenting the petition with 72 signatures and laying out the residents' concerns: fake landscaping projects, unauthorized fines, and the HSD's overreach. The crowd murmured in agreement, and I saw a few council members nodding as they flipped through the petition. Then it was Karen's turn. She stepped up to the podium, cleared her throat, and launched into a speech that sounded like it had been written for a dystopian movie. "Pinewood Estates is a sanctuary," she declared, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "But that sanctuary is under threat from residents who refuse to follow the rules that keep us safe. The Home Safety Division is our first line of defense, and their authority must be respected." She pointed dramatically at Brian, who tried to look heroic but mostly looked constipated. I glanced at Emily, who was sitting beside me, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She hadn't said a word, but I could feel the energy radiating off her, like a coiled spring ready to snap. When Linda Harper called her name, she stood up, her movement smooth and deliberate, and walked to the podium with the kind of confidence that made the room go quiet. She didn't rant or yell. She didn't even raise her voice. She just opened her manila folder and started presenting the facts, one by one, like she was briefing a room full of generals. Over the past 2 years, she said, her voice clear and steady, Pinewood Estates HOA has paid $215,000 to Green Vista Landscaping LLC, a company that doesn't exist. No fountains were built, no roads were repaved, and no flower beds were planted. The company is registered to Brian Daniels, a member of the HOA's Home Safety Division and Karen Brewster's cousin. The room erupted in gasps. Karen's face went white, then red, then white again, like a malfunctioning traffic light. Emily didn't stop. She pulled out printed screenshots of the fake invoices, timestamped footage from our security cameras showing no work had been done, and even a copy of Brian's business registration, which listed his home address as the company's headquarters. A tiny condo in downtown Charlotte that definitely didn't have room for landscaping equipment. She then played a recording of Karen, captured by a neighbor's Ring doorbell, threatening to personally evict anyone who brings shame to our community. The crowd burst into laughter at that one, and I saw Linda Harper hide a smile behind her hand. As Emily wrapped up, one of the council members, an older man named Robert Ellis, leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice casual but clearly rehearsed, "what exactly is your background?" The room went silent. Emily gave him a polite nod. "I'm currently active in a classified capacity within a U.S. Army Tier 1 Special Mission Unit," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "My clearance level prohibits specifics, but I've served for over a decade in operational planning, intelligence coordination, and international threat assessment." You could have heard a pin drop. Then Robert sat up straighter, a grin spreading across his face. "I thought I recognized you," he said. "Welcome home, ma'am." Turns out, he was retired Army, and suddenly, Karen's credibility dissolved faster than a popsicle in a microwave. Karen tried to recover, stammering about miscommunications and community safety, but the council wasn't having it. Linda Harper cut her off mid-sentence. "Ms. Brewster," she said, her voice sharp, "did you or your Home Safety Division have the legal authority to fine or detain residents?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to change the subject. Linda didn't let her. What followed was a public dismantling of everything Karen had built. The council ruled that the HOA's actions were outside the scope of any legal authority, ordered an immediate audit of their finances, and advised residents to stop paying dues until the investigation was complete. Karen left the hearing without a word, her binder still on the table, her HSD goon trailing behind her like a lost puppy. That night, Pinewood Estates felt different. As I walked home under the street lamps, I saw neighbors standing on their lawns, talking to each other without fear of a violation slip for excessive loitering. Someone had put up a lawn sign that said, HOA, helping oligarchs annoy, and I laughed so hard I had to stop walking. Back at home, Emily was on the porch, sipping her tea, her boots up on the railing. "How does it feel to take down a dictator?" I asked, sitting beside her. She smiled faintly. "It's not over yet," she said. "Karen's down, but she's not out. People like her don't go quietly." I nodded, knowing she was right. But for the first time since we'd moved here, I felt like we were winning, and it felt good. The next few days in Pinewood Estates were like the aftermath of a hurricane. Everything was quiet, but you could still feel the tension in the air, like the storm wasn't quite done with us yet. The HOA clubhouse doors stayed closed, the HSD golf carts vanished from the streets, and Karen was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally given up. I should have known better. Emily called it the calm before the counterattack, and she spent those quiet days preparing, her laptop humming with activity as she cross-referenced more HOA records and sent emails to contacts I didn't even know she had. "She's not done," Emily said one morning, her eyes scanning the street from our porch. "People like Karen don't just walk away, they double down." I nodded, sipping my coffee, and wondered how much crazier this could get. While Emily was strategizing at home, the neighborhood was coming alive in a way I hadn't seen since we moved in. Kids were riding their bikes again, laughing as they raced down the street, no longer worried about an HSD goon fining them for reckless cycling. Porch lights stayed on past 9 p.m. without fear of a $50 penalty for light pollution. Jessica even threw an impromptu barbecue in her backyard, inviting half the block, and I found myself flipping burgers next to Tom, the retired postal worker who'd helped with the petition. "Feels like a real neighborhood now," Tom said, handing me a spatula. "Thanks to your wife." I grinned, my chest swelling with pride. She's something else, isn't she? I said, glancing across the yard at Emily, who was sipping lemonade and chatting with Mrs. Carter like she hadn't just taken down a suburban dictator. But just as we were starting to relax, Karen made her move. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in my basement office, debugging a client server, when Emily called me upstairs. "Mike, you need to see this," she said, her voice calm, but with an edge that made me drop everything. I ran up to the living room, where she was standing by the window, holding a letter in her hand. It was another certified mail envelope, no return address, but we both knew who it was from. She handed it to me, her expression unreadable. The letter was written in dense legal jargon, but the gist was clear. Karen was accusing Emily of militant behavior and psychological intimidation, claiming she'd orchestrated a coordinated campaign to undermine the HOA. She'd even attached a blurry photo of Emily jogging, with a caption that read, "Evidence of aggressive intent." At the bottom, in bold, was a demand for mediation to avoid federal litigation. I burst out laughing. "Federal litigation?" I said, shaking my head. "She's lost it. She's actually lost it." Emily didn't laugh. She set the letter down, reached for her phone, and made a call. It was short, maybe 2 minutes, and I only heard her side. A few yes, sirs, a nod, and then, "Thank you, I'll handle the rest." She hung up and turned to me, her eyes glinting with that quiet intensity I'd come to recognize. "We're on the record now," she said. "Let's see how deep this goes." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew better than to ask. Instead, I watched as she drafted a response, not to Karen, but to a federal office I'd never heard of. She printed it, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope marked Karen Brewster. It wasn't a threat or a warning. It was a cease and desist order, signed and dated by someone with a lot more authority than Karen could ever dream of. The next morning, a courier in a Navy windbreaker with government insignia on his shoulder delivered it to Karen's house. Jessica, who saw the whole thing while walking Max, texted me a play-by-play. Karen stood on her porch for a full minute, just staring at the envelope like it was going to bite her. Then she ran inside. I think she's freaking out. While Karen was spiraling at her house, the neighborhood was taking matters into its own hands. Mrs. Carter and Tom organized a Reclaim Pinewood campaign, printing lawn signs with slogans like "Smile," "You're not being fined," and HOA, helping oligarchs annoy. Within 2 days, 15 houses had signs on their lawns, and Karen's urgent HOA bulletin threatening sanctions for unauthorized signage when ignored. People were done with her rules, and they weren't afraid to show it. I even saw a group of kids drawing chalk art on the sidewalk, something that would have earned a $100 fine a month ago, while their parents watched, smiling. It felt like Pinewood Estates was finally waking up, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride knowing Emily had started it all. But Karen wasn't done yet. A week later, she showed up in court for her first hearing, representing herself, which should have been the punchline of this whole saga. According to Tom, who watched the live stream on the county website, she opened her defense with a slideshow that included clip art of gavels, the HOA logo she'd designed herself, and a poorly photoshopped image of Emily standing next to a military helicopter, which she claimed was proof of paramilitary influence in local governance. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee when Tom told me about it. The judge let her speak for all of 10 minutes before cutting her off with a single question. "Did you ever have the legal authority to fine or detain residents in your neighborhood?" Karen tried to dodge the question, but the judge wasn't having it. What followed was a legal smackdown. The court ruled that Karen's actions constituted misconduct, fined her $5,000, ordered her to pay restitution to residents for baseless fines, and barred her from serving in any residential leadership role for 10 years. That night, Pinewood Estates threw a block party to celebrate. Burgers sizzled on grills, kids ran around with sparklers, and someone blasted Sweet Home Alabama from a Bluetooth speaker. I stood by the dessert table, a plate of brownies in hand, watching Emily laugh with Jessica and Mrs. Carter. She looked lighter than I'd seen her in weeks, her smile genuine, her shoulders relaxed. But as the party wound down, I noticed her step away to take a call. She walked to the edge of the yard, or back to the crowd, her voice too low for me to hear. When she came back, her expression had changed. There was a flicker of that old intensity in her eyes, the kind I hadn't seen since her last deployment. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She nodded, but her smile was tight. "Just work," she said, and I knew better than to press. Later that night, as we cleaned up paper plates and folded lawn chairs, Emily got another call. This time, she took it inside, closing the door to our home office. I stayed outside, chatting with Tom about his plans to run for the new HOA president. His first act, he said, would be to remove every rule except don't be a jerk. But my mind was on Emily. When she came out, she was holding a sealed envelope, her face unreadable. "I need to pack," she said simply. My heart sank, but I nodded. I'd known this day might come. "When do you leave?" I asked. "Dawn," she said. "I'll be briefed on the way." She didn't say where she was going or how long she'd be gone, and I didn't ask. That's how it's always been with us. But as I watched her pack her duffel bag with the same precision she'd used to take down Karen, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and worry. Pinewood Estates had been her warm-up. Whatever came next was the real mission. The sun wasn't even up yet when I stood on our porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, watching Emily walk toward the black SUV parked at the edge of our street. It was 5:47 a.m., and the air was crisp, the kind of early morning quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. Emily moved with that steady, purposeful stride I'd seen 100 times before, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her blonde hair catching the first hints of dawn. She didn't look back. I didn't expect her to. That's just who she is, always moving forward, always ready for the next mission. As the SUV's taillights disappeared around the corner, I felt a pang in my chest, a mix of pride and that familiar ache of not knowing when I'd see her again. But I also felt something new, hope. Pinewood Estates was ours again, and Emily had made that happen. If you've been with me through this whole wild ride, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever had to deal with a Karen like ours? And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button so you don't miss what happens next in our crazy little neighborhood. The days after Emily left felt different, like Pinewood Estates had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The HOA was officially disbanded, thanks to the city council's ruling, and Tom, our new president, wasted no time tearing down Karen's reign of nonsense. His first act was exactly what he'd promised, a single bylaw that read, "Don't be a jerk." I laughed when I saw it posted on the community bulletin board, right where Karen's members-only sign used to be. Neighbors started talking to each other again, real conversations, not just the nervous whispers you'd hear when the HSD golf carts were circling. Jessica brought over a basket of zucchini from her garden one morning, just because, and I found myself getting invited to poker nights at Tom's house. It was the kind of suburban normalcy we dreamed of when we moved here, and for the first time, I felt like we belonged. Karen, meanwhile, had vanished from Pinewood Estates like a bad dream you can't quite remember. Rumor had it she'd moved to a condo in Raleigh, where she was trying to get a job at a real estate agency. I didn't know if that was true, and honestly, I didn't care. She'd left behind a legacy of lawn signs and memes. Someone had even made a sticker of her face on a golf cart with the caption, "Obey or Pay," which I saw on at least 3 cars in the neighborhood. But her real legacy was the way she'd brought us together. Pinewood Estates wasn't just a collection of houses anymore. It was a community, one that had learned to stand up for itself. And that was all because of Emily. A week after she left, I was watering her rose bushes, trying my best to keep them alive, since I'm about as good at gardening as I am at karaoke, when the mailman dropped off a plain manila envelope with no return address. It was stamped with military clearance codes I'd never seen before, and my heart skipped a beat as I tore it open. Inside was a single certificate, an official commendation from the Department of Defense, praising Emily for exceptional conduct and civilian oversight in defense of constitutional rights. There was no ceremony, no medal, just the document and a handwritten note that read, "We're proud of how you handled it. See you soon." I stared at it for a long moment, my throat tight, then folded it carefully and placed it in Emily's secure file cabinet, the one she never lets anyone touch. I knew she'd want to see it when she got back. That night, I sat on the porch, a beer in hand, staring at the stars above our backyard. The wind rustled through the trees Emily had planted, and I thought about everything we'd been through. Karen had tried to run this neighborhood like her own little kingdom, but she'd picked the wrong fight. Emily didn't just take her down, she reminded everyone here what it means to stand up for what's right. I thought about the last thing she'd said to me before she left, her voice soft but firm as she placed a note on my desk. Karen was just the warm-up. This is the mission. No signature, no details, just that. I didn't know where she was or what she was doing, but I knew one thing for sure. Wherever she was making the world a better place, one precise, calculated move at a time. The neighborhood kept moving forward, too. Mrs. Carter started a community garden in the empty lot by the clubhouse, where kids used to play kickball. Tom organized a monthly potluck, and I even tried my hand at making chili for the first one. Spoiler alert, it was terrible, but everyone was too nice to say so. Jessica's dog Max became the unofficial mascot of Pinewood Estates, leading the kids in a parade down the street during our first ever block party that didn't involve Karen's clipboard. And me? I kept running my cybersecurity business from the basement, but I also started joining the neighbors for morning walks, something I never would have done before. It felt good to be part of something bigger, something real. A month later, I got a text from Emily. Just 3 words. I'm okay. That was it. But it was enough. I smiled, picturing her somewhere out there, doing what she does best. I didn't know when she'd be back, but I knew she'd come home to a neighborhood that was better because of her. Pinewood Estates wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and for the first time since we'd moved here, I felt like we'd found the peace we'd been looking for. Karen had tried to break us, but instead, she'd made us stronger. And as I sat on the porch that night, listening to the crickets and watching the stars, I raised my beer in a silent toast to my wife, the woman who'd taken down a suburban dictator with nothing but her wits, her courage, and a glare that could stop a tank. Here's to you, Emily. Come home soon.